I've talked about this here and there. I think I've mentioned it before, but I wanted to focus on it specifically here for a moment, and that is, I'm going to bring together kind of two issues here, right? One of them is it's basically the under the what we call it. Let's just call it the umbrella of something that science is now calling neuroplasticity, which means that however your brain is wired, then so what? I mean, rewire it. Now think about that. Just think about that for a second. How many of you have ever heard statements like, well, leopard can't change its spots, or, people never change, or that's just the way he is, or the popular ones in the last handful of years, which drives me crazy because it's so not true. I hear this all the time, in media and this, well, my husband or my wife, they're borderline personality or narcissistic personality, and, they don't change, they can't change. That is not true. It is not even close to being true. All of that added up equals this: people can change, people can grow, people can be transformed, people can go from despairing and hopeless to thriving. I've been doing this a long time. This is not theory. I have seen so many people go from here to there. I remember when I first went into this field. I first went in this field, and I was learning these kind of like these little models of how people grow and change and how to treat this and treat that and this and the other. And I remember for a couple of years early on, I went to work in a psychiatric hospital right out of college, and even the last couple of years in college, and then just learning, just still wet between between the years, wet between the ears too, wet behind the ears. And I remember thinking, you know, this is not worth giving my life to. I don't think I'm going to go into this field. And they had all these little models that were popular and being taught. Sometimes a lot of them, it's hanging out in the faith community. Some of them were in the faith community. Some of them were in the non-faith community. But it was stuff like, everything depends on your thinking and how to change your thinking. And you got to love yourself before you love anybody else. And, just kind of these models and these templates. And I would see people getting helped, and I would see them, depressed people. You treat the depression, and they would get better. Or eating disorders, learning how to cope with their eating disorder better, and this and the other. But it just wasn't. I wasn't seeing enough to make me want to give the next, many decades to this field. I got really discouraged, and then kept going further in my training and got some new experiences and got introduced to a whole different world of models and research and just the ways that people grow. And I always use the phrase, it's like I was born again. It was like, wow, this is why I went into this field. I went into this field not to see people learn how to cope with anxiety better, but to be people who used to be anxious who are no longer anxious, or not how to cope with an eating disorder. I remember a lot of times you would hear back then, well, bulimic, and I know I'll always have this. I got to surrender and all this kind. No, no, no. That doesn't have to be true all the time. It doesn't. I would see people with eating disorders develop normal relationships with food, for example. And so I'm saying all that to say this, that when we begin to get on a growth path that's actually aligned with the way that we are created and the way that we work, and as science is validated, and from the chair I sit in, our faith validates always the same things. And we learn these principles as we're going down down that track of these principles, the change that can happen in your life is limitless. But one of the things that hangs on is something that we now call neuroplasticity. We used to call it growth, but what that means is that your wiring is not fixed, it's plastic. It can be melted and changed and reformed. But here's what we also know about it: that requires new circuitry to grow, new wiring to grow, laying down new code in the computer and the software. And you know what that requires? In most aspects of it, it requires a relationship. It requires, first of all, our being melted. Think about how if you've got a candle, for example, and it's a certain shape, you can reshape that candle. But what do you have to do? It's got to be heated and melted, and then the wax can be kind of reshaped. Well, that's kind of how we are. We've got to get to a vulnerable position where we're open to taking in, reshaping, taking in new voices from the outside, because we took in a bunch of critical voices from the outside before, and learning new behaviors, taking risks, learning, messing up, correcting, new wiring gets formed, and we can change. So, what is all that to say? That all that to say is I'm just really excited about your future and the possibilities. That once you get into the kinds of supportive relationships that you need, and you can get vulnerable in those relationships, and those relationships are working on the right issues with you, and kind of pushing you towards new behaviors, that new circuitry begins to get laid down, and we change and we grow.